Hey everybody, I'm Kevin.
And this is James. So we're here and we're going to talk about a couple more basketball movies we've been watching. So today I think we're going to talk about Streetball, is that right?
Yeah, we watched a couple movies that the theme of Streetball is interweaved pretty well into them. The first movie, a basketball classic, White Men Can't Jump, starring Wesley Snipes and Woody Harrelson. What do you think about this one?
Yeah, I think this one, and this is kind of up for debate. We were talking about this earlier. Could very well be my favorite film of the ones that we watched, and I would put that right up there with He Got Game, and Blue Chips, which I also really enjoyed, and that was kind of a surprise for me. And it's a little bit difficult to compare it to the LeBron documentary. But the other film that we have for Streetball is Earl the Goat, Man of Goat. I think it's called Rebound or something like that.
Starring Don Cheadle, follows the story of New York streetball legend Earl the Goat, who I think one of the more famous stories is when, was it Wilt Chamberlain? Or was it Kareem?
Yeah. So he was almost the same age as Kareem.
Yeah. When someone asked Kareem who the greatest player he was ever to have gone against, his answer was Earl the Goat, who was someone who he had played in maybe one of the Rucker leagues in New York, and
who we never see him get to go against.
Exactly,
they're very aware of each other.
Certainly, yeah.
Yeah.
Let's talk a little bit about He Got Game. I liked it. It follows two guys who meet on a streetball court in L.A. I think it's they're down at Venice Beach playing streetball.
Yeah.
I liked it as very, very 90s. I think the way they kind of take on each other, they take on basketball, they take on streetball, is very just in your face. The way they talked about life, politics, even race, I think that it was kind of refreshing. It was very, very 1990s, even the way that they were interacting in their relationship.
This is a little bit more straightforward than some people will call it over political correctness that we have today.
Yeah, which was kind of, I think a lot of that comes from the nature of streetball, which is where they're interacting. Most of the time is on the hardwood as they go out and either are playing against each other or running their hustle to try to hustle other people out of money.
Yeah, and those Venice Beach courts are apparently pretty famous, is that right?
Yeah, that's right. They're referenced in the beginning. Woody Harrelson's character comes from somewhere in the Midwest, and he's just amazed to be there at the courts of Venice Beach and get a chance to run against Wesley Snipes.
And how would we've discussed sort of the history of streetballing, and you know a lot more about this than me. But do you know what if the scene would have still been a lot of people are complaining about sort of the demise of streetball and stuff like that now, how there's no one good playing in New York or whatever.
Yeah.
How would the scene have been in the 90s?
Yeah. We see this a little bit in both movies where, in White Men Can't Jump, that's essentially where all the talent is out on the streetball court. In Earl the Man of Goat, they're running in the Rucker League, and a lot of these guys are as good or if not better than NBA players. The movie about Earl Manigault, which takes place a little bit earlier, he was playing in the 1950s, 1960s?
Yeah, I think it was, if it would have been Kareem, it would have been the 60s.
60s, yeah. And a few times people come up to him and tell him he has enough talent to be playing in the NBA. And I think part of what his response is that essentially at that time the NBA was very much a white man's league.
Yeah.
And a lot of the talent in New York and in the inner cities were playing in these courts and these leagues, kind of like the Rucker court. So I think that, we see this in the movie. There's probably some of the greatest talent in the country playing on these streetball courts, and as that transitions into the 80s and 90s, which is kind of where White Man Can't Jump takes place in the early 90s, kind of the tail end of the streetball culture, where that's still the place where if you're talented and you want to go up against the best players, you're doing that on a streetball court.
That makes sense, yeah. And another reason that streetball sort of died around then, this organization's been around apparently since the 1800s. Who knew? But it really started to take over basketball, especially with sort of that youth demographic, is of course AAU.
Yeah, definitely. And it was interesting. We see this with in the LeBron James documentary, where he's on the same AAU team since 6th grade. So I think as AAU started to realize that they could really make a lot of money by finding talent, getting talent, growing it, and then eventually that talent gets recruited and goes on to play at a higher level.
And sort of paying it back or whatever.
Exactly, and then start telling them, don't play on the street anymore because you're going to get hurt. You're going to learn a style of basketball that's not transferable to college or the NBA. Come to AAU, just play here, learn the system, and that's all you're going to do. And I think a lot of youth, whether for good or bad, I think we talked about, there's a lot of debate, have kind of subscribed to that and came off the courts and went into the gym.
Yeah, and one other thing I really liked about both of the films, actually, and is that they really, and I'm not super familiar with streetball culture at all, is they really showed sort of like the brutality of streetball culture.
Oh, yeah.
It's like there's just like lots of close-ups of just like guys shoving the other ones, not so blatantly or anything like that. Nothing close to a foul called or anything like that. So it's kind of like, it's just a different ballgame, really, than like the basketball that you're familiar with if you watch a lot of NBA, for instance.
Yeah, definitely. I think in both movies, there's like players that get completely cold clocked in the face, and the game just keeps going on, not even missing a beat.
Yeah.
It was interesting too. One other thing we talked about with we see this in the movie about Earl Manigault. Something that really disrupts streetball culture as well is we see kind of in the 80s and 90s the crack epidemic in some of the inner cities, and as crack becomes really relevant in some of the neighborhoods, we see it in Earl Manigault, where the court he's playing on becomes essentially completely overrun with some violence and drug dealers and things like that, and he kind of takes initiative to reclaim that, but also seeing that dynamic on some of these courts that were maybe popular streetball destinations really falling under some of the activity that goes on there.
Yeah, it's sort of interesting to see the way that like cocaine and crack have sort of like integrated themselves into sort of the basketball culture, because of course like it wasn't even just limited towards like the inner city courts or whatever. I mean, like definitely. The NBA had some serious drug problems in the 70s and 80s. I mean, like Mitchell Wiggins, Andrew Wiggins' father was like had some issues back then and stuff. So it's like it's interesting to see, and it makes a lot of sense that, I mean, like crap always rolls downhill. So like if you think it's bad for like the pro athletes, it's like seeing it at sort of like the lower levels, it's like way worse.
Exactly. Yeah, and we see that. I mean, in the movie, just deteriorated. The court is like essentially torn up. There's concrete and just all kinds of chaos on it.
Yeah,
keeps all the. He sees I think there's a scene where he sees another kid who has a ball but just can't play because the court has essentially been overrun.
Yeah, and that was sort of like his redemptive moment in the movie, is sort of like retaking the court. He like makes a last stand with the drug lord or whatever. Yeah.
So one thing that is also just integral into streetball culture, and we see this a little bit in the movies we watch, is the smack talk. What do you think about the smack talk in White Man Can't Jump?
Well, the smack talk in White Man Can't Jump is highly enjoyable. It's just like, and I read. This is an article that anyone that's remotely interested in the movie or has seen the movie White Man Can't Jump should watch, is go to Grantland and look up the oral history of the film. But it's just super interesting to hear like all the smack talk, and it sounds like a lot of it was sort of like impromptu a little bit, and like all the gambling that was happening in the film and outside of the film apparently. So and like a lot of the shenanigans, it's just a very fun read.
That was great. It was funny to read that when Wesley Snipes auditioned for the role, he came onto the set in character and was just talking smack to everyone that was there for the audition, and I guess instantly they...
Yeah, and who was it that they were supposed to cast? Denzel?
Yeah, Denzel Washington, who was actually there initially... we're hoping to get Denzel, but he was shooting for Malcolm X at the time, so he declined the role, which we talked about. It would have been a very different movie had Denzel been in it rather than Wesley Snipes.
And it could have potentially been very good still, but it's hard to see someone besides Wesley Snipes or Woody Harrelson in that role. And we also learned that in the Woody Harrelson role is supposed to be Keanu Reeves.
Yeah, but that was almost a disaster.
Now that's pretty clear. Yeah, that would have been a mistake.
Yeah, apparently he almost injured himself and somebody else by just trying to do a layup during the audition. Was that right?
Yeah, it sounds like Keanu Reeves might look like an athlete, but apparently he never played basketball.
Yeah,
because it sounded like it was a complete mess.
Yeah, it would have been some bad news. Yeah, it's interesting thinking about, we talk about the connection to some of the stuff to the NBA, but even seeing now in the NBA, I feel like there's not as much good trash talk as maybe there had been when there was a breed of players who were coming out of the streetball culture and then getting to the NBA. Guys like, someone who's historically known for being one of the best smack talkers, like Gary Payton, just was able to get into people's head and really affect the game by the way he was able to talk and use his words, and
Yeah, and information just travels so much faster too. So that could definitely be something.
Yeah,
it's like, you like captured it on Vine or something of like Gary Payton
true.
swearing. And
yeah.
Like, my mother saw this, and
that's true. That's true.
A terrible person.
Yeah, there's some
whatever,
disincentives. We may have who was that? Lance Stevenson, blowing in LeBron's.
Yeah. So,
but yeah, just like there's definitely not. I feel like there's not as much, and like maybe we're just kept from it, but there's not as much. It's not as integral part of the game anymore, which I miss that.
And what did you think about sort of just like the level of basketball in both of the films?
Yeah, well, I think I was a little disappointed with the basketball in the Rebound, the movie about Earl the Goat. A lot of shots of Don Cheadle like flying through the air, which were just a little bit unbelievable.
Which were probably not Don Cheadle.
Yeah, definitely not Don Cheadle.
It wasn't even the greatest stunt double, to be honest.
Yeah, which is incredible because I've read some stuff, real accounts of Earl the Goat, of him like jumping up and grabbing dollar bills and quarters from the top of the backboard, and he has like this famous two-hand dunk where he jumps up, slam dunks it, and then dunks it again with the other hand. And they try to show some of that in the movie. It just there wasn't a lot of good basketball.
Mm-hmm.
I thought the basketball in White Man Can't Jump was pretty good. We see a lot of 2-on-2, some 3-on-3 streetball tournaments, and it was pretty well.
And we were actually just looking up the director. I think Don Shelton was his name.
Yeah,
is that right? Yeah, and he has directed a lot of sports films. He did Tin Cup, Bull Durham.
He did another movie with Woody Harrelson as a boxer, which
with
we have to watch that one. Yeah,
that's right. It's close to a sports movie specialist as Hollywood could produce. So clearly very interested into like gamesmanship and sports. And I don't think he's directed 2 movies in the same sport, but but he's clearly sort of in that genre.
Yeah, I thought that was. It's interesting. One other thing we've been talking about too is just like what it takes to become a great NBA player. I think there's a saying about Earl the Goat where they say for every Michael Jordan there's a Earl Manigault, meaning someone who is equally talented as a Michael Jordan or a Kobe Bryant that just didn't have like the right
circumstance or
whatever.
Yeah.
The right circumstances. We talked about this earlier. The right frame of mind, the right supports. There's just so much that goes into the pedigree of a person to make them become like a great player that sometimes talent just isn't enough.
Yeah, especially during like this early era in like the 60s and 70s, it would be very easy to believe like basketball has always been sort of like it's at least known as more of an inner city game and stuff like that, and like there could very well be very talented people that fall through the cracks and stuff, and I feel like that's probably happening less and less now through the AAU system. You see like a tall guy and you probably go scout him out or whatever, but like in those times when there were like 2 black players per NBA team and stuff like that, which was one of the comments in the film, then it's easy to believe that someone like Earl the Goat could fall through the system.
Exactly, yeah. And it's interesting, even in White Man Can't Jump, I think both the Wesley Snipes and Woody Harrelson's characters mentioned that they both had extensive backgrounds playing like high school and a little bit of college, and sounded like they were obviously very talented, but life just took them elsewhere, but they still were able to play on the street. But who knows what could have happened in their lives had they had the right circumstances to maybe be in the NBA.
Yeah. And so believe it or not, we haven't really talked about like how we feel about the films in general this whole time. Yeah. So what was your, like, which one did you prefer of the 2? Did you like one or dislike the other?
Yeah, I mean, I think for me, hands down, White Man Can't Jump was better, a more enjoyable movie than Earl the Goat. I thought it was a really good balance of the basketball, but also the life. We get a pretty in-depth view of like the relationship between Woody Harrelson and Rosie Perez as they're like trying to make ends meet, and that was kind of fun. I like how it ended where he doesn't get her. There's like the line that says sometimes when you win you lose, sometimes when you lose you win, and sometimes when you tie you win or lose. And that kind of is like a theme that weaves through the movie, just showing the complexities of life and things like that.
Yeah, and I thought that film did a real good job of just like those 3, like Rosie Perez should definitely be mentioned along with Wesley Snipes and Woody Harrelson. They just did a great job in general, like a very character-driven film, and I feel like the characters are all well developed and like they're very easy to like. There's good chemistry between all 3 leads. So yeah, I definitely like that. I would agree with you that White Man Can't Jump was a far more enjoyable film to watch, and I'd have a much easier time recommending that over
certainly.
Earl the Goat, despite the IMDb rating apparently.
Yeah, and the wonderful cast: Don Cheadle, Forrest Whitaker, Kevin Garnett.
Yeah, that's true.
But it was definitely made for TV. I think it was straight to HBO.
Yeah. So it felt. It honestly felt very sort of episodic, made for TV. I don't know if there were commercials in it when it showed, but
that would have made sense.
It would have made sense in the structure. So I don't know if they planned to show it with commercials or whatever. But it was kind of oh, here's this episode of Earl's life.
Yeah.
This is where Earl goes to boarding school.
Yeah.
This is where Earl gets redemption.
Yeah.
And it felt very. It hit a lot of sports cliches.
And I think, it definitely did. And on the other side of that, with White Man Can't Jump, there was a lot of misdirection and complexity. Talked a little bit about just addiction and gambling and how that kind of plays into the lives of the characters. And it took the story places I didn't expect it to go. I was surprised at some of the turns in the end. We even talked about how kind of the climax of the movie happens a little bit early. And then when they win the tournament, and then the movie still has to resolve some of the conflict, and that was really good.
Sort of like your traditional sports movie complex where climax where you're sort of building up to that big game and that big event where they have that moment of triumph. That happens super early, like you said, in White Man Can't Jump. And then the movie just keeps going and continues to develop the characters and I appreciated that because it's like a film that's really about the characters, and it's set to. The streetball scene definitely plays a part of it, but it's that is sort of the backdrop of the film,
and an ending that's really, I would say, anti-sports. We see where they win the tournament. That's typically where the sports movie usually ends, with Woody Harrelson and Wesley Snipes hugging and holding up a trophy. But this one ends and they're in an abandoned lot, listening to music and kind of reminiscing on Woody Harrelson having lost his longtime partner, which is not how a typical sports movie ends, but I think it was
So even though they won, it was kind of a very lukewarm ending. It wasn't an overwhelmingly happy ending. For instance.
And I appreciated that from a film perspective.
Yeah. Cool. Well, is there anything else we wanted to talk about?
I think we covered everything. Today we're going to watch Hoosiers, and next time we're going to be watching Hoop Dreams, and then talking about those in our upcoming episodes.
Yeah, so thank you guys for watching. We'll have to come up with a name for ourselves at some point,
we're working on it. It's a work in progress.
Yeah, so we'll see you guys in a week.
See you guys.